Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Burke again from Follow Me Leadership, and I want to take this time to kind of continue the discussion about my early experience of being bullied. You can get all the details of that entire experience, which lasted several years, in my book that should be coming out around Thanksgiving 2019, called Stand Up and Fight Back, the story of being bullied. So yeah, I'm gonna kind of cover, like, a little bit more in detail about how it affected me. I think last one I kind of discussed a lot of the things that went on, what I experienced, and I think now I want to kind of dive a little deeper into, how it affected me, and at that moment as well as later on in life. So I'll kind of discuss, the impact of into my teenage years and development into an adult, how it affected me in learning. And then I have some thoughts at the end. I think we'll kind of touch on about, dealing with bullying and, some things I think we can start to discuss and how to fix it, or I don't think we'll ever cure it, but I think we can at least kind of deal with it. So yeah, just to kind of recap a little bit, when things began for me, it was in fourth grade. So probably within the first couple of weeks of starting fourth grade. It happened predominantly on the bus in the beginning, but eventually towards the end of the year, spilled out into some places in the public. Definitely other areas of school, lunchroom, bathroom, playground, in the hallways, anywhere that, these guys could find me. And they, like I said before, they were older boys, either a year older or 2 years older than me. And it was a constant, ongoing daily ritual almost. Not to say that I guess maybe it happened every single day, certainly not every single day on the bus, but there was always moments where, even if it was one little moment, if somebody noticed me and shouted out an insult, to the other extreme where, maybe I was getting picked on and physically assaulted on the bus, to maybe they found me again in the lunchroom, maybe in the bathroom during that day, the playground. There were some days where it just seemed to kind of happen every time I turned a corner. And what was interesting is that, so when things kind of started, and I touched on this a little last time, that, the guys that were doing the bullying kind of had a systematic way of going about it. Not that they sought out to intend to be systematic about their approach, but it was, when I look back on it and kind of study it, from the, know thy enemy perspective, I can see how they would go from one kid to the next up and down the bus and kind of just, get in some people's faces. Some it was tame, some it was a little bit more mean, some it was just downright nasty. But it was basically just trying to find little pain points or trigger points of everybody. And the kids that I think that at least kind of survived, or at least were able to get out of this bullying experience unscathed, were the ones that learned how to deflect pretty well. And when I say they would deflect, they would, they're getting picked on, they're being tormented verbally about some aspect. Maybe it was what their hair looked like, their face, maybe they were fat, maybe their clothes looked stupid, whatever it was that these guys didn't like about them. But they would kind of take that in a little bit, but the whole time they're standing around the bus looking at everyone else, trying to find something they can redirect attention to. They might, let's say if they were being picked on and the bully said, "Oh, that's a stupid jacket or a stupid pair of sneakers you got." They're like, "Oh, what about Timmy? Look at his jacket. That's like really stupid." And, kind of hoping to draw the attention, to somebody else. And a lot of times they were very successful in that, because these bullies weren't out necessarily to hurt any one person, at least not in the beginning. Eventually I was the predominant target. But they were just looking to exert their influence, exert their strength, their dominance over everybody. And so in a way they were winning even with the person deflecting, because it was kind of like, all right, you're now working for me and helping me to identify my next target. And so, yeah, but from that person that's being picked on at the moment, that's a huge relief or point of success, because now all of a sudden they're not being picked on, because now they've moved on, they're dealing with somebody else. And it, it's, I don't blame those kids. I honestly, if I could go back in time and work with the little boy that I was, I would try to coach myself on how to be good at deflecting things, because I was never good at it. In fact, I didn't even really attempt it. But if I could have, it would have certainly changed a lot of things for me. That wouldn't have been maybe the ultimate best move I could have done, but it would at least saved me from a lot of mental anguish and years of pain and lack of self-esteem. But yeah, so they'd start making their rounds up and down the bus, and you could kind of tell everybody was always on edge when these guys would start. You know, I think I said the last time the typical bus ride was, you know, they'd get on, they'd have their boom box, they'd start playing loud, you know, hard rock, heavy metal music, and you'd just listen to that, and everybody could talk freely and have a good time until we got to school. And you know, eventually, like, the music would go off, and it was like instant. As soon as they turned the music off, everybody's conversations just went down to a dull roar, and it would go from just, you know, like a low roar, dull roar, to some murmuring, to absolute silence. Nobody wanted to talk. Nobody wanted to move, because if you were talking, you would draw attention. You know, and I know for a fact there were a couple times where, I think in the beginning, before everyone learned to be quiet, that the radio would come off, and then somebody would be continuing to talk away, and the boys in the back are just listening to this conversation, and eventually that drew them up to want to go get involved. And all of a sudden, that person who's, you know, talking or whatever, now all of a sudden they're being the target because of whatever their conversation was about. So people learn pretty quickly that as soon as that music goes off, you got to start being quiet and kind of don't move. It's kind of like, I don't know, I picture it, you know, from a military standpoint, you know, you're out on guard duty somewhere on a patrol, and all of a sudden you hear some noises in the woods, and you just be quiet because you don't want to draw the enemy to you. You know, that's the only way I can kind of compare it to. But yeah, so you can kind of get an idea of just how in fear everybody was all the time. You know, and when the bullying ended up focusing on me, and again, as I said, you know, it's my fault. I tried to retreat into the darkness. I tried to retreat into a hole so I didn't have to deal directly. Actually, I wanted to try to ignore it and run away from it. And initially what that allowed was them to have free reign over their bullying. You know, they could push this kid around without any fear of reprisal. But what I found is, I really look at things later on, the more and more I retreated into this dark hole, this absolute nothingness, the more frustrated they became, because they're looking for a reaction. They're looking for validation that they're exerting influence and trying to exert fear over you. And until you know, show something more, then, you know, like, running away to them is not a success. You know, in a way it was a little bit, but initially it was, but eventually they got over that, and now they needed something more. It's kind of like, you know, it was a drug. You know, there was an initial high to see somebody kind of cower and hunker down, but then after a while, that's not enough. You got to have more. You got to have it more often. So the bullying became more frequent. You know, as it started after a couple times with me, you know, it would still continue to be a routine where they would make their way through the bus, going from kid to kid, insulting everybody, intimidating everybody, to eventually they didn't even bother with anybody else. They went right to me, because I was the easy mark, and I started to give them the reaction. You know, I started to cry, I started to whimper and hunker down, and just tears and snot coming out of me. So I made it very a good show of success, if you will, for their torment. And so, you know, ultimately what that really did for me was, my sense of self-worth was just non-existent. It got to the point where I would sit there and be kind of hunkered down in like a little crash position, as I used to call it, and be crying, and I'd be staring at my book bag on my lap, just looking at the tears kind of soaking into the bag, and I'm almost like stepping out of myself, looking at this little kid crying, and I I think at first I felt sorry for myself and wondering, why is this happening to this kid? Why is this little boy going through this? To eventually I disliked myself. I started to look at me with negativity, like, not as a way of trying to motivate me, but just as an internal criticism or a self-critique, if you will. I just felt worthless. I felt like I was an absolute, wimp. I was a piece of crap. And I had no respect for myself. It was, and it's awful. No kid should ever have to feel that way about themselves. But I had, by the time I got to that point, I think I was kind of past the point of no return. There was no way for me to ever pull myself out of this. It was something that I was going to have somebody else intervene, because I had no confidence in anything. I didn't try, for anything. I know, like, in my book, I talk about how when we would have in gym class, we would do this. It was every, end of the year. I know we did it a couple times during the year. We would do this. I don't know what they called it, but it was like a track and field test, if you will, where they had a 3/4 mile run, they had a 100-meter dash or 100-yard dash run, they had a long jump and all these different things, and it was part of your grade, I guess. And I would literally was at the point I didn't even care. I didn't want to try. In fact, and part of that too was, and I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit more in another episode, that, seeing an adult laugh at you or ridicule you just absolutely compounds the torment that you're going through, and it makes you feel helpless and worthless. So yeah, my self-esteem was just not there, and it actually, so that's the thing. It took me decades to really develop it. Now, I think one of the things that did help me in life was when my parents pulled me out of the public school system, and they sent me to a different school. I went to a Jesuit high school in Buffalo, Canisius High School, and it was probably the best thing they ever did for me, because I got to kind of start fresh, rewrite my narrative and who I was and what I was as a person and a young man. But at the same time, I never dealt with my issues. I never fixed anything. So those issues were always there. Everything was, just always, deep down inside my soul, but they were tucked away. And unfortunately would come out when I needed my internal strength the most, throughout life. But yeah, so the idea of me trying to push myself to do things just wasn't there. Occasionally I did, and when I did, I was successful. But I always second guessed everything I did. I second guessed everything I wanted to try for, and that happened well into until recently. I think where I finally was able to, I think in writing this book really helped me kind of quash all of those feelings. And I think I still have a little bit of self-doubt every now and then. I think everybody does. Even in the book that I wrote, Stand Up, Fight Back, after it was done, after it was edited, I was ready to send it to the publisher, but I must have reread it like 4 times, because it was like, well, let me make sure. Let me just make sure that it's ready, make sure it sounds good. So I had a little bit of doubt, and I think everybody does, and that's natural. But early on in life, those feelings, they dominated me and really kept me from developing and learning. I was a terrible student in elementary school, and even in high school I really struggled, especially you go from struggling in the public school system to now I'm in a Jesuit college preparatory school. I was really struggling, but early on, when all this bullying was going on, I mean, I had teachers that said that, I should be held back a grade. I had teachers that said that maybe I'm dyslexic, or maybe I'm just learning disabled. One teacher actually said that I should move into the special ed class that they had. It just, and you hear that as a kid, and it just like, you start to believe it, and it compounds all the self-doubt and the lack of self-worth that you had. The other thing that, is really interesting that I look back on is the amount of fear that I had day in and day out. And I get into this a lot in the book where, when I finally met the bullies outside of the bus or outside of school, there were moments I saw one of them at a grocery store. I saw them in the woods where we used to ride our bikes. I was confronted in the mall. They came at me from a lot of different directions that I never thought they would. This was always kind of confined to the school bus and within the school property. But now all of a sudden they're finding me everywhere. So all of a sudden, it's like I had this tremendous fear that I can't even leave the house. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to go anywhere nearby. I started to think maybe I just don't even want to go to friends' houses. I don't want to ride my bike anywhere. I had a couple of friends that lived beyond the street where these bullies lived, and I'd ride my bike up my street, and when I got to where the side street was where these bullies lived, I used to stop my bike, get off, and I'd kind of peer around the bushes to look down the street to kind of see, is anybody coming? And because one time I pulled up to the intersection, and there was a car there waiting to turn, and the back window rolls down, and here's this kid who's tormenting me every day, yells out the window and calls me a loser. So all of a sudden I panic, and I remember that time specifically. I was on my way home. I was on my way to my friend's house, and I turned around and I pedaled back to my house, which was like 3/4 of a mile away, and I pedaled so fast like there was a pack of rabid wolves after me. And as I come down screaming down the driveway and just dumped my bike somewhere into the driveway and just ran into the house upstairs and into my room, and because I was so afraid and of seeing this kid and having him come after me. There were times in the woods. We used to have this huge expanse of woods behind my house where kids would ride dirt bikes and four-wheelers, and we'd ride our bicycles all over the place. And there was a quarry that we'd go to where you could ride up and down hills and jumps and whatnot. And I remember seeing them back there one time, and I was actually on the back of a friend of mine's four-wheeler, I think it was. And as soon as these guys confronted me, I hopped off and I just started running down the trails back towards my house. And I ran just with my helmet on and everything, and just kept running and like in a hyperventilating type panic mode. And because in my mind I'm picturing they're coming after me to kill me. And I think at one point I started to hear like a motorcycle in the distance, so I dove off into the woods and hid in the bushes. Turns out it was my friend coming to find me, and because this kid had no idea really what was going on. And so I get back to my house, and he was there, and he was like, "Why did you leave like that?" And I said, I don't know, I just didn't want to be there anymore. I don't like those kids. And then I just said, I got to go inside, and gave him his helmet back. And then I went in, and, I think I stayed in there all day. And that happened a couple times where I'd be confronted with these guys, and I would take off running. I saw them on the playground one time, and I ran from them as fast as I possibly could, like a rabbit trying to get away from the dogs, or the hounds during the hunt, and zigzagged all over the place and just trying to get away. Eventually they did catch me. And I got tormented, slapped and punched and spit on, and it was awful. And no person should ever have to deal with anything like that. I think even if you yourself are a jerk, you don't deserve to be treated like that. But that was the type of experiences I was getting day in and day out. So, even going with my dad to the grocery store, I was always constantly looking around, to see who's there. We would go into another aisle at the grocery store, and I'd kind of slowly peer around the corner, just see. And one time I saw, this one kid, the kid who primarily tormented me all the time, I saw him with his mom at the grocery store, and I panicked. And I told my dad, I said, I'm going to go look for something, a cereal or whatever. And I just, I turned the corner and I sprinted so fast through the grocery store to the opposite end of the store. And I hung out there like in the frozen food aisle for, I don't know, 10, it felt like an hour, but it was probably like 5-10 minutes. Eventually I figured I got to get back to wherever my dad is, so I kind of would peer around the corner, and I'd, I felt like a spy moving through, Soviet Russia, trying to, make it to the border or something. And I'm kind of peering around buildings and, around the aisles, and just slowly making my way to, and when I finally caught up to my dad, he's like, "Where have you been? What are you doing?" And he just had no idea. Because that's, and again, and I'll get into more of the compartmentalization later, but, I kept as much of this as I could from my parents. Well, and for no other reason than I was embarrassed. I didn't, God, if I could go back, I would have been more open with them and what was going on. Even when they sensed something was wrong and tried to question me about things, I should have just started talking about it then, because it would have probably been fixed, or at least it would have been addressed a lot sooner. But yeah, so when you think about this level of fear that, you're in a grocery store with your dad, and you can't even shop with your dad or walk with your dad without fear of somebody's going to come kill you. That's, imagine and I was 9-10 years old, at that time. I was developing a real kind of severe case of PTSD from this level of fear. And when I say that, that I had PTSD or was developing it back then, it wasn't like, I'm now sitting in the corner in the dark of my closet, at night, and just not, or doze, I was always in fear, and it was really screwing with me emotionally and mentally. And I really didn't think about it as PTSD until actually in the last probably 10 years since I, served in Iraq, and kind of started to learn a little bit about PTSD, what it is, and, just reading up on, because I experienced some things in combat, that have certainly stayed with me. Certainly not to the degree that a lot of people did. But, I've been kind of studying it because I can see how we're leaving a lot of people behind that suffer from PTSD, especially in our military. It's, when I really think about that, I can start to analyze, with a child that develops PTSD from whatever their traumatic experiences are. It could have been one major experience or a collection of lots of experiences over years like I did. It affects them in so many ways. Learning was a big thing. I didn't pay attention in class, not because I was a daydreamer or thinking about, climbing mountains or flying planes or anything, that might be of a good daydreaming. No, I was constantly wondering, if I heard somebody walking down the hall, I wondered, is that these guys? Are they coming to get me right now? Or if I had to go to the bathroom, am I going to find them? And this is true story. When I was, in 4th and 5th grade, if I had to go to the bathroom, I learned, so I got caught in the bathroom a couple times by these guys. I'd get punched once or twice. One time I just got punched a whole bunch of times in the stomach, in the arm, leg, slapped around a lot. The other time they slapped me around a little bit and pushed my head into a toilet. I learned after a while that I had to try to avoid the bathroom. Now, you physically can't avoid going to the bathroom, but I realized I could get into the janitor's closet in the hallway, and I would go use the mop sink to go to the bathroom. And I did that for a long time. And of course, occasionally, every now and then, that door would be locked. Usually it was left open, but every now and then it was locked. And if it was, then I found there was a back door near where like the kindergarten kids had their classrooms. I'd go to that door, and they were locked from the outside, so I'd take my shoe off, stick it in the doorway, and I'd go outside, and I'd pee outside on the back wall of the school because I was scared to death to go into the bathroom, because being in that bathroom meant you were out of sight, out of mind. Teachers had their own bathrooms. They were never in there, so it was like Lord of the Flies in there. And again, I'm developing these core roots of PTSD and just affecting me in so many ways. And, when I think about what it did to my ability to learn things, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think I was a good student, or let me rephrase it. I never knew how to study until I was in college. I never knew how to retain information in class so that I could use it on an exam or a test until probably midway through college. I had a roommate of mine. Side note: I just had a roommate of mine. He noticed how I was studying and thought it was so ridiculous what I was doing, and sat me down and really straightened me out. And it was interesting because then the following semesters after that, I was getting straight A's all the time. I learned how to absorb stuff in class. I learned how to take exams and write papers a lot better. It was instantly, because he changed a few things about me. But I look back on it, my experiences in elementary school, and what developed my learning ability, that it really screwed things up, in how I retain knowledge. Well, and I'll get into some of the teacher issues in another episode, but they were certainly a factor as well. So yeah, the other thing I did want to say is, so if you think about where I'm at that point, all this level of torment, the fear that I'm going through, I'm at the lowest of lows. By the end of my fourth grade experience, I was at such an all-time low. I had no self-esteem. I had no self-worth. I had no joy at all in life. I hated everything. And there wasn't really anything I enjoyed except, maybe just sitting at home. If we had it playing video games. Of course, now this is back in the early 80s. I had an Atari 2600, which I thought was the greatest game set ever made. I can't even imagine what we would have done with an Xbox or a PlayStation back then. But yeah, so, that was fun for me. But the other thing was, in the summer times, just being in the pool was probably the greatest experience of all time. I grew up in Buffalo, and summers can be extremely hot and incredibly humid. We didn't have air conditioning growing up, like no central air, no window units or anything like that. I didn't experience what air conditioning was other than being in a car until I think after I left college, and I got married. I think the first apartment my wife and I lived in had central air. I had never lived in that kind of experience, and until I was in my early 20s. So, needless to say, so being in the summer, the opportunity to go to the pool was huge, and I had some neighbors that had a pool that, we would go to every now and then, and it was the greatest thing in the world. That's all I thought about all week long was, I couldn't wait to get to, Saturday so I could go to the pool. And yeah, so where that kind of left me was, so you think about where I was at, my incredibly low self-esteem, zero self-worth, and the only joy I seemed to find in life was being at the pool. Well, what that kind of led to was, there was, my neighbors had an older son who was probably 8-9 years older than I was, and, he kind of sought me out as a potential victim. And, there was, it happened probably 4 or 5 times that summer that he would kind of seek me out, but he sexually abused me. And, when it started, it was kind of confusing at first. It was tame. I'd be in the bathroom. He'd come in and want to use the bathroom too. It was just always weird, to have somebody want to come in and use the bathroom while you're using it at the same time. But then, as it escalated and evolved, it was, to me, I wasn't looking at it from the standpoint of I'm being sexually abused. It was, all I wanted to do is just get outside and get back in the pool. And, I think even at one point, there was a mention of, hey, if you tell anybody, your parents are never going to let you come back to the pool again. And, so I could see how he was manipulating me into keeping my mouth shut. But, and I bring this up not to, illustrate something else that I experienced, but it's the idea of, you look at where I was at emotionally and mentally, and how that made me the perfect victim for a different type of abuse. This wasn't him beating on me or hitting me or threatening me. Other than, telling my parents or something, this was, it made me a perfect victim because of my low self-esteem, my low self-worth, for sexual abuse. And I, when you look at other cases of, kids being sexually assaulted by adults or even just older kids, I can kind of understand how these instances come about. Not to say I'm not justifying anything. Please don't take that from this. No, what I'm looking at it from the standpoint is I can see how situations arise. And again, remember, my parents really didn't have any idea. They knew by that point when that was occurring, they knew that I had gotten picked on at school, but they knew about a couple of isolated incidents. They didn't know about the almost 9 months of constant torture and the fear that I was living in. And I feel sorry for them because I did a very good job of keeping that away from them because I didn't want them to know. But I look back at it now. I'm a parent now, and I look back on it, and it would break my heart if I knew my girls were ever suffering, internally because of stuff like that, and I had no idea. I would take it as my failure, and I would, certainly never put this on my parents because they did what they thought was right, and they did intervene when they did find out about some things, but I just did a very good job of keeping it from them. I think I said earlier that how I dealt with a lot of this stuff is I learned to compartmentalize as a kid, not knowing that that's what I was doing. In my mind, I just wanted to be a regular kid. I wanted to ride my bike, wanted to have fun, play video games, go in the pool. I wanted to go to the arcade at the mall. I wanted to, trade baseball cards and, ride my bike around. And, that's all I wanted to be, was just a regular kid. And in order to be that regular kid, I had to try to take all these feelings of this fear and the worthlessness and the doubt and everything and just try to push it down and push it away. And I found that I could kind of tuck it away, into my soul and just forget about it. Well, not that I would forget about it, but at least I would put it out of sight, out of mind. So to the point where, there were times I got off the bus after being picked on and ridiculed. I'd be crying. By the time I got to the house, I'd, kind of dried my tears and everything and, took a couple deep breaths and it was like nothing happened. And I'm sure that's why, for the most part, my mom never knew about it. She found out about it eventually when I got off the bus after really getting knocked around quite a bit, slapped and poked, and they would flick your ears and everything. And because I got off the bus and I was just looked like a disheveled mess, crying. There was snot coming out of me. I was drooling everywhere, and my face is all red. My ears are bright red. There was no hiding that from my mother. But that's when she had gotten involved. But for the other times, yeah, I kept it away. They never knew about any of the sexual abuse I experienced. At least I don't think they did. They never said anything to me if they did. I kept that from them because I was embarrassed. And I can understand, when I really think about this, I understand why people don't want to talk about, being sexually abused or being raped or something, because it's demeaning, it's embarrassing, and you want to pretend like it never happened. So I get that. I don't fault anybody who doesn't want to come forward with, stories of stuff like that. But yeah, so, this idea of this compartmentalizing, the other kind of things to consider about this, number one, back then, again, this is back in the early 80s, I never knew anybody or knew of anybody or heard any stories of anyone committing suicide ever. I mean, I can't even remember, probably even in college, high school, college, even immediately after, I just don't remember ever hearing stories of kids committing suicide. It just didn't happen. It wasn't on the news anywhere. And so, now that's not to say it didn't happen, but it wasn't wasn't anything like it is today. I that's for damn sure. So I never thought of that. It never came up. I hated myself. I hated my life, and I wanted, I mean, I guess maybe if anything, I thought about running away. But the thought of running away meant I didn't want to leave my parents. I didn't want to, leave my home, and we also didn't, I mean, as a kid, I never even got into like drugs, alcohol like that. I don't think I even tried alcohol until I was in high school. But even when I did, it was never a means to escape. Even in college, where you had kind of some unsupervised access to alcohol, I never thought about using alcohol or drugs or anything as a means to get away from problems or anything like that. So I think I got real good at compartmentalizing to the point where, I could, be walking down the hall being, picked on and ridiculed, and turn a corner and it was like nothing ever happened. And I don't know, I mean, maybe in a way, maybe that was a good thing, but I think it in the bigger sense, it was terrible, because it just allowed all of this to perpetuate. And maybe I was, I don't know, maybe it was denial. Maybe I think I was naive to think that, this is going to just eventually go away. They'll stop tormenting me, but they never did. It got worse and worse and worse, and it wasn't until, just kind of everything exploded. It wasn't until in sixth grade, where things actually kind of turned the corner a little bit for me. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit about, some of those experiences that I went through, things I experienced, what I was dealing with, what I was thinking or not thinking. And I know, I'm a big proponent of, don't ever bring problems forward if you don't have solutions, So I know in my book, I definitely talk a lot about how to fix things. I will say, first and foremost, we're never going to end bullying. You're never going to stop it. It will always be there. All right. It's I don't want to say it's human nature, but yeah, it is. There's something within us that, we're going to exert dominance over other people, and it's so, yeah, maybe it is just human nature. But I think when we really drill down to kids that are being bullied in school, that's where the focus is. I'm not interested in fixing human nature. If you think you can fix that, then you'll probably end all wars in perpetuity, for the remainder of our existence on this planet. But that's not going to happen. So, but when I think about, how to fix the bullying, there's really the first step before we can do anything is parents have to get involved. And I say that carefully because I don't want to ever say that it's the parent's fault that their child is being bullied. I would never suggest that, because it's not your fault. But you really have to take ownership of what's going on in the schools. I've always kind of said that teachers are kind of a parent, a surrogate parent for kids for about 40% of their day. You think about it, the kids leave the school at, I don't know, 7:30 in the morning, and they don't come home till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, that's like a third of their daylight. And, that's a long period of that day that the teachers are kind of overseeing care for the child. So yeah, they have kind of that surrogate responsibility to parent, but you are that child's parent. All right. You need to insist accountability on the schools. Don't ever take lip service from the school that says, yeah, we're going to look into this. We'll take care of it. If they do tell you that, you say, okay, sure, I'll call you on Monday and we'll talk about it. Demand answers. And if you keep getting brushed off, push further. If you have to, call the police, call a lawyer. You got to do these things. You have to. But if I can say anything, the biggest thing, how we're ever going to really curtail a lot of the bullying that's going on is there's one primary, I guess, effort that has to happen, is you need to teach kids to stand up for themselves. I say this in my book. There was a moment, a very pinnacle moment for me in my life where I had an opportunity to turn things around. and we were outside in my front yard. I had a little league game that day, so my dad was kind of warming up with me. We were throwing the ball around, and one of the kids who was bullying me was riding his bike past the house on the street. And he just, as soon as he got towards my house, so I was out there with my dad, he just started yelling, "Loser, loser, loser." And it immediately just sunk me down into my pit of despair. And I felt awful. And, eventually my dad came up and looked at me, and he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, "Hey, I can get involved. I can try to fix this for you. But until you stand up and fight back, it's never going to go away. They're never going to stop." And he was right. Any kid may not be able to physically beat up whoever's bullying them. But until they stand up and show that they're not going to be a victim anymore, it's going to continue. You can institute all the rules and zero tolerance policies and suspend kids and make them write on the board or make them stay after school all you want. That's not going to stop them from being a bully. What stops a bully from tormenting another kid is that kid standing up and saying, "No, I'm not going to be a victim." And that kid's going to either have to punch that bully in the mouth, or they're going to have to at least stand up and say, "No, I'm pushing back and I'm going to at least give it a fighting chance." And that's the moment where, yeah, it might be a little bit aggressive. It might be confrontational right there in that moment, but you've at least shown that you're taking your own as a child, you're taking the step forward in the world of self-confidence and self-esteem and pulling it back. You're going to regain that ownership of your inner being. And, if you think about the bullies, a lot of people have always said, child psychologists and people whatnot always say that bullies are real cowards at heart. Well, yeah, there's something to that. But when you do think about it, really what that really means to me is that they're just looking for the easy marks. I made it ultra easy to pick on. I was the easiest mark of all because when it came to me, I cowered down and started crying. I mean, who could have been an easier target than me? So, yeah, if I could go back and find that 9-year-old boy that I was crying on the bus, I would have just, it would have been like in The Godfather when he, when the Godfather grabbed that guy and he said, "You can be a man." I would have loved to go back in time and just shaken myself and say, "Man up, stand up to these boys and fight back." There was a moment too where after my mom got involved, the principal got involved, and I knew these guys were coming for me. And the one kid who was the primary tormentor of me sat down in the seat next to me and was conversing with some people across the aisle. And eventually he turned around and he looked at me and he just shook his head. That was the moment I should have just punched him right in the face. I think if I had done that then, I probably would have taken a beating, but that would have been the last time he sought me out. Because now I showed that, yeah, you can pick on me, you can torment me, but I'm gonna make you pay for it, and it's gonna sting. And sometimes we have to let kids get a little physical in order to defend themselves, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that's going to stop bullying. At least, the very least, of standing up and showing that you're not going to be a victim anymore. And I know that's probably the hardest thing for everybody to swallow. I know teachers and school administrators hate that idea because they think we're promoting violence. You're not promoting violence, but sometimes the only way to stand up to violence is with violence. I'm sorry, but let's just get real here. You can look at it at an even bigger scale and look at all the conflict we have around the world. You can sing songs and write resolutions all you want, but until you send your military somewhere, it's just, I'm sorry. We have to get real, because these are children. These are our little kids that we're talking about, and they're getting picked on and tormented. And unfortunately today, they're committing suicide at massive rates. They're bringing weapons into school and finally, taking it out on everyone, after being bullied. We can't let this go on anymore. Yes, you teach respect, you teach love and respect. I believe that wholeheartedly. But at the end of the day, I always learned that, the Bible always told everybody that, you got to turn the other cheek. But I don't remember ever reading that it says you got to keep turning that cheek back and forth and just take it all day long. Eventually, you got to stand up for yourself. the way it is. Anyways, hey, hope that touches a few hearts and souls out there. If you have any questions, please hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. If I also be on the lookout for my book coming out, as I said, it should be out maybe around Thanksgiving of 2019 of this year. It's called Stand Up and Fight Back. You'll be able to get it on my website as well as you'll be able to get it on Amazon. And if you need me to come speak at a school or any event, you have something coming up you'd like me to get involved in, I'm always available. Please don't hesitate to ask. All right, take care, everybody.